This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 23rd of June, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. And I don't hear anything from Michael Wade. I don't have any volume for you, buddy. So I'm not sure what the issue is on that side.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay.
And you are?
I'm Michael Wade.
Hi. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. We took Father's Day off. So there has been a lot of stuff that has been happening. And even more interesting, at least one thing that hasn't happened, about which more in due course. I'd like to start off, though, with something that is very recent that just happened over the last, day. And that is that using American ATACMS missiles, Ukraine launched an attack in Crimea along Sevastopol. The Russians are not happy, and the Russians are blaming us. The Russian Ministry of Defense says the U.S. is responsible for the Ukrainian attack on Korea. More specifically, their defense ministry said U.S. specialists had set the missile's flight coordinates on the basis of information from U.S. spy satellites, meaning Washington was directly responsible. So it is the responsibility is borne above all by Washington, which supplied these weapons to Ukraine, and by the Kiev regime, from whose territory the strike was carried out. This is troubling, especially in light of Russia's new mutual defense pact with North Korea, which says that they are obligated to support each other in the event that one or the other is attacked. So which
automatically pulls in China as well.
Right, because North Korea is a client state of Red China. And so this happened last week. And then this week there is that ATACMS strike in Sevastopol. And now Russia's saying the United States is responsible for that. Is that an attack by the United States on Russia? First of all, the idea that U.S. specialists, which presumably would mean U.S. military personnel, personally set up the strike packages in the ATACMS. If true, we shouldn't be doing that, because that comes about
That's involvement in war.
Yeah, that comes about as close as possible to being an act of war.
Right.
It's one thing to sell missiles to Ukraine, which the Russians also don't like. But, from our perspective, missiles like ATACMS, they all have a shelf life. You've got to get rid of them. Either you're going to have to send them back to Raytheon and have them torn apart and rebuilt, or you have to shoot them, or you have to sell them. But they can't sit on the shelf forever, these missiles. So our choice is to give them to the Ukrainians. Okay, but that means that the Ukrainians have to be 100% responsible for it. If we have personnel in Ukraine, and I'm not saying we do, I'm not saying that the Russians are correct about this, I'm also not saying that. I don't know, but that is as close to a casus belli as we could expect.
And that we've come so far. The supporting Ukraine is one thing. Having active military advisors is a much different thing. Now, I don't give two shits about Russians' plea over Crimea, which isn't Russian. But this is, again, what we've been talking about for literally decades. This sort of half-assed war fighting. We try to do it around the edges and be sneaky and either declare war or don't declare war. I mean, this is how we get ourselves stuck in these. I hate to use the term quagmire, but that's kind of what it ends up being.
Yeah, and the trouble is, we no longer send out clear messages. I mean, you could make the argument that George W. Bush set out a clear message about terror in the immediate post 9/11 aftermath, but that message sure got muddied pretty quickly after Afghanistan and Iraq. And everything has been kind of an are they, aren't they deal with American forces. And I'm getting tired of a couple of things. I'm tired of forever wars because, I live in San Diego. So I live relatively well. I don't live in San Diego. I actually live in North County. I'm literally a couple of miles outside the main gate for Camp Pendleton. I know a lot of Marines. For the 7 years that I was a professor at Park University until I decided I just didn't want to do that anymore. All of my classes were on Camp Pendleton. All of my students were Marines, or Marine dependents in some cases, but largely Marines. I have family members who were stationed there. I have family members that work there right now. So this eternal war footing that the United States is on is a problem. And we don't telegraph. I mean, we haven't had a good war really since World War II.
Exactly.
Where we actually had Congress involved. They gave an explicit declaration of war. Now, one can say that we haven't been fighting nation states, and fighting terrorism is a little different. So an authorization for the use of force, even though
we had the Barbary Wars that we took care of through action of Congress. So
right, and that was all terrorism as well.
Right.
But of course, the invasion of Iraq was the invasion of a sovereign country. We never declared war on Iraq.
Right, just the AU.
Just the AUMF.
MF, yeah.
And that can't go on forever. And we've gotten so used to doing things kind of behind the scenes and like the whole, 8 years of Obama, drone strike city. As if that wasn't an act of war. Whenever you're conducting drone strikes in sovereign foreign countries, most countries would consider that an act of war. We've gotten away with it.
We would.
Yeah, we certainly would. If somebody launched a drone strike and killed, name some random, mid-level American politician.
It could be a Muslim, intransigent or something, that gets struck. You don't conduct that kind of military operation in America without consequences, at least without consequences that would be expected by most of the populace. Let's put it that way.
Right. But we've gotten so used to doing that in other countries it slides off of us. So are the Russians telling the truth when they say that U.S. personnel programmed the strike packages for these ATACMS? I have no idea. Nobody has any idea. But I damn sure think we should know if that's going on. If we are putting U.S. military personnel to serve as advisors and strike package programmers for these ATACMS, that's a problem.
Yes, that's what we did in Vietnam. That's what we did in Korea. And those both turned into long-term investments of blood and treasure that never made much sense.
Yeah, well, look, with Korea and Vietnam, there was the general anti-communism of the time, and we had to contain the Soviets. Although with Vietnam, when it became obvious that the South Vietnamese weren't willing to fight for their own country,
yeah,
we shouldn't have been willing to. And I remember Lyndon Johnson once saying publicly, "I am not going to send American boys to Vietnam to do what Vietnamese boys should be doing for themselves." That turned out to be false. He was perfectly willing to do that, and he had 600,000 troops there at one time.
Yeah.
And with the global war on terror, we've become so used to operating everywhere, and special forces have basically had what seems like a free pass to do well, it seems that the existence of Tier 1 special forces, especially the size of our Tier 1 force, has given America's political leadership the freedom to do all kinds of sneaky stuff. And maybe
Yeah, I was
this
going to
is,
say that's not coming from the special forces themselves. They go where they're directed to go and carry out the mission they're directed to do,
yeah, the
and
military
that
doesn't set
ultimately
policy.
comes from the politicians.
And so I really want to know what's happening there because in 1914, whenever the Serbian assassins killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, everyone knew that if Austro-Hungary attacked Serbia, that would bring Russia in. And if that brought Russia in, that would bring Germany in, and that would bring in France and England. Everybody knew it. And they managed from July to August, well, actually from June to August of 1914, just sort of stumble their way into World War I. And as they asked the German Chancellor Bettmann Hollweg in 1917, how did the war begin? If we only knew. Well, we kind of know, and it still doesn't make any sense to us. Because once one side said...
It was Metternich. Metternich put together all these alliances and stuff, and it triggered one big, huge imbroglio.
Yeah, and the idea, of course, was a general European war would be so horrific.
It was a détente. The idea was a assured mutual destruction, right?
Well, they got it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Because any event whose likelihood does not decrease over time is inevitable.
Yep.
And I can't imagine a worse policy than getting involved in a war between Russia and anyone, or getting involved in a war with Russia. Because the problem is, and I think this is one of the things that did kind of scare the Pentagon, was when Russia first invaded Ukraine and they didn't win. And here we are 2 years into this, and Russia is no further along than they were. People who knew military affairs quickly came to the conclusion, if we ever were to go to war with the Russians conventionally, we will slaughter them. And their only possible response will be to turn those keys in the nuclear silos.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if they can't beat Ukraine, a country they outnumber by 10 to 1, both in terms of manpower, and it's probably much higher.
And there are Russian sympathizers in Ukraine, too.
Yeah, exactly. There are Russian sympathizers in Ukraine because a significant proportion, probably about 20% of Ukrainians would prefer to be Russians because they were part of the Soviet Union. There was no bar between migration from the Russian SSFR to the Ukrainian SSFR. And I don't even want to get into that. The fact is, we now know that the Russian military is incompetent. Historically, we've always known this. Even the wars that Russia has won have been a series of unmitigated military disasters that they only overcame through the mass application of manpower, throwing people into the meat grinder until the other side ran out of people. That's how Russia wins.
Absolutely mass atrocities committed with just like millions and millions of Russian lives put to the slaughter. And they ended up winning or at least tying, but they lost so much manpower.
Yeah, even the wars Russia have won have been an utter disaster.
Yeah.
So we have no fear of Russia militarily as a conventional matter, but we do know what Russia's nuclear policy is. We know what every country's nuclear policy is. You know why? Because we all make them public so that nobody screws up.
And we also assume that they're lying.
Well, we assume that the Russians lie about a lot of stuff, but we don't think they're lying about what their nuclear posture is, because that is too dangerous a subject to screw around with.
Well,
Everybody,
yeah, it's mad, right?
yeah,
It's the
everybody.
mutually assured destruction.
Well, that's certainly one thing that we had. Although the point is, nowadays every country publishes what their nuclear strategy is, and they publish the parameters under which they would consider using nuclear weapons. Sometimes they're a little cagey about it, like, would we use tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield? Maybe, maybe not, you don't know. But when it comes to the continent busters, everybody's pretty clear about what would cause them to launch. And defeating Russia conventionally and invading Russia would be an automatic launch of their entire stockpile against the United States. How far we can push them if we have military advisors helping out the Ukrainians, I'm not sure, but it can't be good. And I think one of the reasons why we have this military alliance now between Russia and North Korea is in preparation for some action against the United States. And of course, by North Korea, what we really mean is China.
Right. Well, it's clear that China wants to go after Taiwan, and
North Korea
Russia
wants
wants
South
to go
Korea.
after Ukraine. And if they decide to help each other, it's going to be damn difficult to stop them, to be quite honest, without a larger scale war.
Yeah, because what do we do if North Korean volunteers start showing up in Eastern Europe?
Right.
I'm not entirely sure. And of course, you have people in Europe who are interested, at least, in the possibility of some sort of conventional action against Russia. In Poland, for example, about 40% of the population strongly opposes some sort of further action, even military action, against Russia. Sure, 60% oppose, but Russia's not popular in Poland. And there are a lot of people in Poland.
None of the border states, the Latvian states,
Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia,
and Poland, Hungary, Romania, they don't want to be taken over. Ukraine, they don't want to be taken over by Russia. They had horrible time of it when they were Russian satellites.
Yeah, so this has me looking askance at what our military policy actually is with Ukraine. And the thing is,
it's not well thought out. Let's put that way.
The thing is, we're not even selling them weapons. We're just giving them weapons. Now, look, a lot of the stuff we're giving them is stuff that, we don't care about, like Stinger missiles. We haven't built Stinger missiles since the late 80s or early 90s.
Right.
They're just sitting there in the inventory.
But we're not replacing that inventory with anything here.
Well, yeah,
that's the problem.
That's what we have several missile systems that have replaced Stinger. That's why we stopped making them.
Right.
So we have a lot of new missile systems, many of which we are not giving to Ukraine, although we are giving them ATACMS. But the Stingers are these little shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. And sure, we can get rid of those. That just gets them out of our inventory, and we don't have to train people how to use them, because we don't actually have them. No unit actually runs around with Stingers. No American military unit, because we've pulled them out of the active inventory. Artillery shells, yeah, we've sent them a lot of artillery shells, but it's really easy to make artillery shells. We order them by the ton when we need them. So that's not a big idea. But it's one thing to sell them weapons. It's another thing to give them weapons. And it's another thing entirely to be over there, if not pulling the trigger, at least pointing them in the correct direction.
I think that's the big distinction right there.
Yeah, well, the distinction between here, let me aim the weapon for you, and here's the button. Push this button now. That is a distinction without a difference. Because it implies that we're working with the Ukrainians on what their strike packages are. Presumably, we're advising them on what their strike packages should be. And then
the planning and coordination of then taking over those areas once they bomb the shit out of them.
Like I said, I don't know if the Russians are telling the truth or not. I tend not to believe much that the Russian government says, because the Russian government has historically said a lot of things that aren't true, but these are attackums. They did attack Sevastopol, and the Russians say that we helped them do it. And we have done so much sub rosa shit that I don't know that the Russians are lying. The Russians may be telling us the truth. And people have become so inured, I think, to, Vladimir Putin is a lying sack of shit. Yes, but that doesn't mean that everything he says is a lie. And it doesn't mean everything the Russian government says is a lie. And quite frankly, given the track record over the last couple of decades of the United States government's commitment to the truth, I'm not sure I would believe a denial coming from the Biden administration or, quite frankly, any other administration. And
yeah, I think that's the real rub. Is it's not so much that we know the Russians lie or the Chinese or whoever. It's that we've lost faith in our own institutions to tell us the truth and to be straightforward with us. They have eschewed that that policy in favor of keeping everything secret and never ever committing to any actual effort. It's all kind of half-assed, behind the scenes, never really authorized, but sort of authorized. I mean, it's shady shit that our government does.
and they'll lie to us straight to our face if it suits them. It's not really directly related, but it is kind of, in terms of the overall attitude of government officials. The whole Hunter Biden laptop thing, and 51 former intelligence officials say this has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, except it wasn't. And they probably had very good reason to know that it wasn't, and they said it anyway. If you can't even be trusted about that for political reasons, what can we trust? How can we trust you? We're in a weird position because we have interests.
Well, it's like Glenn Reynolds and the rest of the crew at Instapun are always talking about the death of expertise. These experts became political and one-sided and ideological. So they have basically undermined their own credibility. And they've done this to themselves.
And by the way, it's not that
we see it.
And look, it's not just that they've lied. It's the fact that in the things in which they are supposed to have expertise, that they are supposed to be the pros from Dover in their selected area of policy expertise,
right?
They fail.
Yeah.
It's one
thing.
Yeah,
our experts are no longer experts to any degree that I can see.
Yeah, it's one thing if I catch you lying and you have to say, okay, you caught me, I lied. It's another thing to say this policy will accomplish X objective. Afghanistan being a perfect example. Okay, what was the objective? I'm still not entirely sure what the objective
I'm not either.
And did we accomplish that objective? Well, most self-evidently not. We are now back at status quo ante. The whole thing with COVID. Well, you have to wear a mask. No, you don't. Yes, you do. No, you don't. Where to? And it had no effect. And of course, now we can see it in studies. It literally had no effect on transmission. And then
it had no effect on COVID, but it had a huge effect on learning curves, on people being absolutely oppressed, locked up at home, scared to bejesus. The kids are who really suffered the most. They couldn't go to school. And if they did go to school, they have to, 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds have to wear masks.
Yeah. And look, by the way,
try to keep a mask on a 2 or 3-year-old.
And by the way, we knew that COVID was a minor ailment for children.
Mm-hmm.
We knew it. Anyone below 12 basically had a little bit of a
was
sniffle.
Immune. Yeah.
And we still kept kids out of school. And then when we sent them back, we had them all masked up and forced, by the way, the vaccination mandate on children going to school. Wait a second. kids don't really have. Who are these vaccines for exactly? Because it can't be to
Right.
protect the lives of the kids, because their lives are essentially not at risk.
Right.
And I'll do it anyway. Why? I guess because the American Federation of Teachers or whoever wanted it. Okay,
That's, I mean, you just nailed it right there. That's what it was.
or the when COVID was at its height and panic was at its height, and then the George Floyd thing happened. Oh well, sure. If you're gonna, it's far more important that you protest racism than you worry about
Right.
COVID.
I mean, that's a national health emergency.
Yeah. So it's this compromise constantly of, and by the way, did we reduce the death rate or the death toll from COVID? No, not really. In every state, no matter what they did, it's really amusing. Somebody said Florida has the third highest rate of COVID deaths. Yeah, they're the third most populous state. So, yes,
And they have the most old people.
yeah, so that's exactly what we would expect. But New York, where everybody was masked and the whole state was locked down and all that stuff, they had the highest rate of COVID deaths because they're the most populous state. So it doesn't look like any of the things that the CDC told us to do really helped in any significant way. What, in fact, they really did was harm us. The 2 weeks to slow the spread turned into months and months and months of businesses being shut down, job collapse.
People lost their livelihoods. They lost their businesses. They lost their homes. It was an absolute shit show of a policy.
But I'm just laughing at something I'm seeing in chat. Hi, chat. Nice to see you. Sean Muller says, is that a filter on Michael's vape? Because
a filter?
Yeah, because when you blow out the vape, it kind of obscures obscures the background. I noticed that. I didn't know that anybody else noticed it, but I did see it in I did see it in chat. Yes, that's it. It messes with your green screen. So yes, Sean, thanks. Inebriated Plutarch says, imagine living through your freshman year of college, not being able to leave your room for anything other than meals.
My son had to go through that. Matter of fact, he was forced to get the shot in order to attend school. He did it like 2 days before he matriculated. And then, yeah, they were very restricted in what they could do.
Yeah, but all that just comes back to the whole Russia thing. We're doing the same thing in military policy as we're doing in every other area of government policy. And while I can't say for sure, because I don't know for sure, I do have at least what I feel is a rational fear that we are just sleepwalking towards World War III.
Unchecked, yeah, I agree with you. And I don't know if we've gone too far to pull back, but I do agree with you that we're on a clear path towards a really destructive world war. And the policies that we and the Europeans are following are not helpful. We're doing the same damn thing that we did before World War II. And it's just so obvious that, again, where's our actual expertise? These people don't seem to know shit. And don't even get me started on intelligence. Oh my God. They don't seem to know a goddamn thing.
Yeah, Chris was talking to me a little earlier today about some interviews that people were doing, and it's not just them. I mean, it's there's a general level of ignorance that I find rather frightening. And one of the things Chris was telling me about is these people going on to like college campuses and talking to people about who they're voting for and why, and their ability to articulate a reason for liking or hating a candidate are so divorced from reality that I don't even know how to address it. And I've seen a couple of these myself, or these people like Steven Crowder or somebody, they go out and they start asking questions. And why should we expect our experts who are educated at these institutions to be any smarter than the current students at those institutions?
Because who supposedly they're teaching.
Yeah, because clearly they're learning nothing. So
yeah,
which kind of brings me on to the next. This is all. It's really hard to separate topic by topic tonight, because of the interlocking nature of the failure of expertise. And by the way, sometimes it's not the failure of expertise. Sometimes it's just the outright malevolence of expertise. At some point, you have to discriminate between incompetence and malevolence. Incompetence explains a lot, but not everything.
It's kind of a description of Robert Reich almost.
Yeah, but so let's take immigration, for example. So we know that the border is largely uncontrolled, despite Secretary Mayorkas telling us, who are you going to believe, him or your own lying eyes? And estimates are that somewhere between 30 and 70,000 Chinese nationals have, over the past 2 years, come into the country. Now, China is not a country that you can just wake up one morning and get yourself an airline ticket to Tokyo and then catch a connection to, I don't know, Mexico City. And
right.
It's difficult to leave China.
Mm-hmm.
So how are these people all getting out of China? And why are they all coming in illegally?
An excellent question.
Because it would not surprise me if China were to launch an attack on Taiwan, for there to be some sort of simultaneous attack inside the United States. And there are certainly...
It wouldn't even have to be like a terroristic attack. They could simply shut down schools, shut down roads. They could... Look at what the Palestinian supporters are doing. They're creating mass havoc any place they can. And the Chinese could follow that model, and it would hamper our efforts to protect Taiwan. How much? I don't know, but I don't even think they need to be violent in order to be disruptive.
Yeah, perhaps not. But if they can get that many people into the country, and by the way, these are the people we know about. We don't know how many people got away. We just don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
We have no way of knowing who never got caught if they never talked to the Border Patrol. And what else is coming through the border? Could it be weapons? Could it be mortars? I don't know, and neither does anybody else.
Children being trafficked.
Yeah,
there's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, we have
fentanyl.
And as a result, China at least has the capability. Now, we don't know if this is done, or if they've done it, or if they've made this plan. If they haven't, they're idiots. Because why wouldn't you plan to bring in militarily trained men? And by the way, these are almost all men that we're catching at the border, not women and kids and families. Chinese men of military age. Now, perhaps they've just lost their job in China and they're trekking here to look for work. I suppose that's possible. But I think it's unwise to ignore the possibility that they are here for other reasons.
They don't deserve the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, we've made it easy for China to put sleeper cells in the United States. And who knows, they may never be activated. But they might. And it would be nice to know that. Without control of the border, we don't have any control of who's coming in, what's coming in, and largely how to track many of these people, because not everybody, it's not like the Border Patrol catches every single person that comes across the border. They just don't.
That's right.
And so that worries me.
And then how many of these people end up on welfare rolls, swelling school district populations, living off several different forms of the dole, and never contribute a goddamn thing to this country.
Well, yeah, there are all those internal social problems. And here's the thing. Immigration is just one of those areas that has so many possible ramifications to it. And by the way, people know it. People aren't stupid. In New York, even in liberal New York, when it comes to immigration, 83% of all voters think that the migrant influx to New York, in this case, is a serious or somewhat serious issue. 91% of Latino voters feel the same way. I mean,
we've been saying this for literally years. It's like the Latino voters who came here legally, did everything right and got their American citizenship. They can't stand these illegal immigrants. They really don't like them. And I don't blame them. I know plenty of immigrants, naturalized immigrants, who they're like, what the hell? It took me 6 years and $30,000 to become an American citizen. Why are we just letting these people in? Why didn't I just walk in?
And by the way, if you give them amnesty, which it appears that Joe Biden is perfectly willing to do, that means that the next president can't just deport them because now they've been given legal amnesty. So they're here to stay. And this is one of those issues where we just saw this in New York where the number is 83%. But I saw last week a poll, and I couldn't find it, unfortunately, in the time I was doing show prep, that showed 70% of Americans are in favor of mass deportations.
Yeah, the last one I saw was 62, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's risen since then.
So there is a majority, perhaps even a super majority, because you can't tell anything from a single poll, but perhaps a super majority to get people out. However, the Republicans and the Democrats, the Uniparty, are basically hand in hand on immigration. They'll both talk about securing the border, but they both want as much low-wage labor coming through that border as possible. And
that's absolutely true.
The fact that it largely hurts low-skilled and minority workers is not a matter of any concern for them. And of course, once you come here, well, let's give them driver's licenses. Okay, great, we can give them driver's licenses. But once you have a driver's license,
let's let them vote in local elections. Yeah. Let's let them, run for Congress.
Yeah, well, here's the thing: once you have a driver's license, you can register to vote.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, and of course, the other thing is that even if they can't vote, the number of immigrants gets counted in the census. And
the apportionment,
therefore, the apportionment of House seats and thus political power goes to those states with the highest population. Not those states with the highest population of citizens, those states with the highest population. So illegal immigrants who largely migrate towards blue states anyway, then artificially increase the power of blue states via the apportionment. And people are getting tired of it. They're getting tired of it here. They're getting tired of it in Europe as well.
Yeah, right. The EU elections.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to that. But in fact, we should get to that because we have said here for years, ever since 2015, Donald Trump is not the problem with the American political system. Whatever you think about Donald Trump, he's not the problem. The problem is a political system that no longer seems to operate on the basis of what is best for the people who are supposed to be governed under that system. It operates for the benefit of a fairly small number of people. In fact, I was listening this last week to Anya, what is her name? Ungar Betya Sargon.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, she has a weird name, but she just goes sort of chapter and verse how Rich, largely progressive elites have managed to capture the lion's share of GDP. And they've done that by looting the middle class. One of the ways that you loot the middle class is simply by bringing in a whole bunch of low skilled labor to reduce wages, to basically make it more difficult for the average person to advance economically. And this can't be a mistake. It can't be an unintended consequence. This was meant to work this way. It's like the whole thing with globalization. Now, look, I yield to no man in my respect for David Ricardo and the theory of comparative advantage.
Absolutely.
And liking free trade. But we don't manufacture stuff in this country anymore, not like we used to. Almost.
And remember, the first part of Ricardo's axiom is all else being equal.
Yeah, all else being equal.
And the problem is that not all else is equal.
It never.
We're already playing on top of a stacked deck.
And so, what globalization has allowed basically a wealthy elite to do is to cash in on globalization, while the people who pay the price are the people who don't count, right? The low-skilled, lower-wage workers, people for whom a manufacturing job would provide, a
which is increasingly the younger generation, and this is why they're just not even participating anymore.
And by the way,
they're not even trying.
And by the way, we've done the same thing with government debt, right?
Yeah.
Because what we have done is we have basically transferred income, largely through Social Security, but there are other means as well, of just making it harder and harder and harder for young people to get an economic start. Because, not only have we looted them in the present, but we will saddle them with such an astounding amount of debt, 35 trillion and counting, not including the, who knows, $100 trillion in unfunded Social Security liabilities that are hanging out there. They're going to be paying for the spending spree that we've been on since 1980 for their entire lives. Yes. Well, perhaps not. We may liberate them from having to do that by simply crashing the US dollar to such an extent that it becomes worthless, and
they lose everything.
35 trillion.
Start over.
$35 trillion in debt is the cost of a 1981 Chevrolet Chevelle. But of course that means that basically everyone's life savings will be worthless as well. And we'll just all get to start over.
Hey, this is Weimar Republic all over again.
Yeah. So we have an elite that has, and I say elite, I'm really talking about the political class, politicians, journalists, senior officials in all of the executive agencies, not only in this country, but in Europe as well. And when they are constructing a system that works well for them, and that does not work for the vast majority of people, there's no reason to wonder or be shocked by the fact that someone like Donald Trump of a particularly populist bent becomes more and more popular and ultimately wins the presidency, and who knows, may win it again. Because he's a symptom of a political system that doesn't work for the people who are governed by it.
That's how William Jennings Bryan became so popular. I mean, of course, he never won, but he had a lot of backing, and a lot of that was from the free silver movement. He was the ultimate populist. He had no real ideology. He just was against, the federal government.
So, getting back to immigration, it's different in America than Europe. Europe has a different problem with immigration than we have. Our problem with immigration, to me, there are cultural issues with it, although historically, the vast majority of immigration in terms of illegal immigration has come from south of the border. So at least we are being invaded by people from, as socialist as they may be, Christian nations with a Western background.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Europe, that's not the type of immigration they're getting.
Completely different. Yeah, that's absolutely right. From West Africa to the Middle East and parts of North Africa. I mean, this is who they're most inundated by.
However, both sides of the pond have the same concerns that the immigration policy, because the policy is the same, which is basically, even though it's not the legal policy here, it's the de facto policy. And in Europe, due to the European Commission on Human Rights, it is the legal policy. Everybody gets to go there. Everybody who wants to get there, everybody who can make it there, basically can make it and can stay. And that is fueling a lot of discontent. So what you end up with is, as you mentioned, and I said we'd get there, and here we are, the European election. First of all, there was the European Parliament election, which went to what they are calling the far right,
yeah,
winning a lot of seats in the European election, and there's been a lot of fallout over that in Europe. For example, France, because of basically the failure of Macron's party in the European elections, he called a national election. And as far as I can tell, it looks like Marine Le Pen is going to win that election.
I think that's probably right. Well, she's part of a coalition, but yes, I think that coalition is going to end up coming out on top. That's what it looks like right now anyway. But
Holland,
they also did very well in the EU parliamentary elections.
Yes.
What's not often mentioned, though, is that immigration is definitely a big problem and was a big issue, but it's the greening of Europe. The Greens lost so much clout and popularity because their policies are literally depriving people of their livelihoods. And anybody who is against the Greens is somebody who's going to come out a little on top. It seems like, anyway, that's kind of how it worked out.
Yeah, well, here is the UK is right in the middle of a national election now, because Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, called an election for July 4th. What I find interesting about this, and this is let's look at just the last 12 months. We can go back, and it already looked bad for the Conservative Party back on 30 May. Then Rishi Sunak comes out and calls for an election. Now, here's what I find interesting. Labour has dropped to 41%. Conservatives have dropped to 20%. The one party that is addressing immigration directly in the UK is the UK Reform Party with Nigel Farage. Basically, what the British like to refer to as our Trump.
Right.
I think, and look, Nigel Farage is a good friend of Trump's as well.
He is.
And spends time with him. And look at how the Reform Party has gone from 11% to 7% or 17% over the last couple of weeks. By the way, the Greens, 6%, and they've had 6% forever. Nobody's voting for the Greens. It's Labor looks like it's going to be a runaway, probably the largest Labor majority since the end of World War II.
I think, that's going to be the ultimate outcome. It's not so much whether or not the Conservatives or the Reform Party is going to be in charge. It's how much are they going to be involved in any coalition to form a government. And Reform is starting to look very powerful. Labor is going to be at the top. I don't see any change to that.
Yeah, but here's
but
the interesting.
Reform is going to make it interesting.
Here's the interesting thing, though. This page from the BBC, it kind of looks backwards because over the last couple of days, looking at some of the reports, and this is updated on the 22nd, but we've started to see outlier reports that has the Reform Party, and I wish I could make this smaller so that we could look at it. I can't. Let's just look at. I just want to look at this. Look at some of these recent polls. They've had. Well, it's hard to tell from this, but we've had Reform polls at 20% or higher. That's just a complete collapse of Labour. Now remember, Labour came in on the strength of Brexit and making Brexit work and regaining control over Britain's borders, and they managed to fudge it all up. And there are, hundreds of thousands. Actually, as Nigel Farage pointed out night before last, 1 in every 30 people that you see walking down the street in England has arrived there in the last 2 years. That's a pretty big percent of the population that has just arrived there. Obviously, most of them from Southwest Asia.
Especially in the capital city, yeah.
Yeah, so I've seen Reform as high as 25. I've seen Reform higher than Conservatives, higher than the Tories. So that loyal opposition may end up being Nigel Farage, who, by the way, is definitely going to be in Parliament. He looks like he has a 35 or 40 point lead in his constituency in Clacton. He's going to be there, and I think it just shows how potent an issue immigration is becoming. And we talk about, and I saw this headline. I think I pulled it. That's the UK election. There's one I may not have grabbed it because it was such an inflammatory headline. I think it was from Reuters. And basically it just talked about how the European elections, all these far rights are taking control. So like Geert Wilders in Holland, far right ideologue. Well, maybe, but he's got a majority government. So how far right is it? And it's
yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to understand that Europe, the right in Europe is fairly libertarian in our view. They're not paleocons or anything. they're not studying Schopenhauer and Bill Buckley. They're very much middle of the road right in that they don't support the mass immigration and that they don't support the green policies. And that's about as far right as they really get. Even Viktor Orban is nowhere near as right as he's portrayed to be. He's really not like some Nazi. Well, Nazis weren't even right. I mean, let's be
Nazis
honest.
Were collectivists. But what's interesting about this is if you go back to 2023, they were at 3% on Reform. So in the last 7 months, 8 months, what we have seen is a jump from 3% to 17%. And that's the average. That's the polling average. As I said, we've seen higher polls. Both in the U.S. and in Europe, we're in the middle of a populist revolt against the system that we have.
And it's mostly coming from the right side of the spectrum who are sick and tired of these politicians espousing, freedom, justice, and prosperity, but do nothing once they actually get into power to solidify any of that stuff or even promote any of that stuff.
Sure, that's the big knock they have in the UK on the Conservatives. We brought you in for Brexit and to stop immigration, and you said you'd do it, and you didn't. Now look,
and then you fucked up Brexit. And look, you made it as long and drawn out as possible,
and gave the Europeans every possible advantage.
And a lot of that was Theresa May. I mean, Theresa May did not do a goddamn thing to help it.
And then, of course, there's the immigration problem, and people can see, whenever And look, we're seeing it here. There's this constant drumbeat, certainly from that I can see when I look at Twitter, and it is coming largely from the right, about the sheer number of illegal immigrants who are committing rapes and murders. And it hits front page news. And you can say whatever you want. You know, these people are just coming here for a better life, and they just want to be good Americans too. Yeah, well, it doesn't appear that way to the average
Where do
person.
they send their money?
Yeah, yeah. Mexico's outside of petroleum, because Mexico has a state-owned oil company, Pemex. Outside of petroleum, Mexico's number 2 source of funds is repatriations, transfers,
Remittances.
from the United States.
Yeah. So, I mean, how are they trying to be good U.S. citizens? They're just going there to undermine our own workers. And look, I don't blame them. I mean, if I had the chance to take advantage of something like that, I would probably do it too. But that doesn't mean that there's any fealty there to our country, to our ideals, to our values. They don't care. It's completely self-interest, which is fine. But that doesn't mean we have to put up with it. And it doesn't mean we owe them anything.
And by the way, that's why Trump is the nominee for president for the Republican Party, because we have 2 choices. We have a structural, and I really don't want to get into the business of rewriting the Constitution, but we do have a structural system based on you got to have a majority to be president, that almost, because of the way the Constitution is written, it almost requires a 2-party system. A 3rd-party system would throw everything into a cocked hat in terms of presidential.
Yeah, because we're not a parliamentary system, so you can't have coalitions. And
yeah,
I mean, you could, but it's much more difficult.
Yeah, because the president has to have an absolute majority, or it goes to the House, or it goes to the House. And I was about to say it goes to the House of Commons, but we don't have one of those. It goes to the House of Representatives. And we don't want every election going to the House. So therefore, we end up with 2 main parties. America has always had 2 main parties because of that one constitutional requirement. Basically sets a structure for American politics. Well, we're not going to find anybody on the left like Trump. Maybe around the edges. I would argue that RFK is a left-wing populist. And so he encapsulates,
I think that's fair.
So he encapsulates populism from kind of a left-wing perspective. But that's not a big constituency on the left. The natural constituency for populism is the center and the right. And whether Trump becomes president again will depend largely on how many people really want to follow that populist message. And if we're left with another 4 years of Joe Biden, then I think 2028 becomes an even weirder election, because you cannot keep this populist strain down forever. One of the things that the 2 parties have always been good at least prior to my lifetime, and for a good part of my lifetime, is whenever these populist movements appear, in order to maintain their viability, the major parties always adopt these populist elements into their platforms. I mean, say what you want about William Jennings Bryan, and he never got elected president, but what he did get was the Democratic Party to basically pull in a lot of his populist philosophy so that basically they could, kneecap him and still elect Democrats. That tends to be what's happened in American politics. Somehow that is stopped. And so what Donald Trump did is he performed a hostile takeover of the Republican Party to get a populist message out. What's happening in the UK, it looks like that there is at least a good chance that Nigel Farage is going to put a bullet through the head of the Conservative Party, and Reform will probably replace them as the party of choice for voters in the center and the right.
That's what it looks like to me too.
And if Donald Trump doesn't get reelected, because look, Donald Trump has his own personal baggage. We don't need to get into it, although are about to discuss at least one element of it in a second. Um, if it wasn't for Donald Trump's here's the thing: this is the most winnable election for a non-Democrat president, Republican or otherwise, since 1984. And the fact that Donald Trump is polling within 2 or 3 points of Joe Biden lets me know that if this was 1984, if this was Ronald Reagan running against Joe Biden, it would be a 50-state landslide.
Easily.
And Donald Trump, bringing his own baggage, has narrowed that, which, by the way, is why the Democrats worked so hard to ensure that Trump was the nominee. They figured he was the easiest person to beat. I still believe that if Ron DeSantis had won the nomination, this election would be over. Joe Biden would be so far underwater, we'd be sending our resumes in to Ron DeSantis for jobs in the new administration because it would be a done deal. I still think Trump...
You're probably right,
win.
Yeah.
I still think Trump can win this because he is the standard bearer for a large segment of the population who just know the system doesn't seem to be working for them anymore.
And he also has a record as president. That's the number one thing he's got going for him. Things were good under Trump. We had low inflation. We had low unemployment. We had high wage rises. We had fairly good GDP.
Yeah.
We did not do great on controlling the budget. Matter of fact, that was a serious sore spot. And there were other sore spots, giving over the entire government under COVID to Fauci and Bricks. That was a bad move. But compared to Biden, where everything's gone down,
yeah, even if you take
there's not even a comparison.
Even if you take the worst things that Donald Trump did, like the response to COVID. So all of 2020 was a disaster because he basically let Fauci and Birx just run wild and basically control American policy. At no point did he tell Fauci, you know what, you just need to shut up. You're a doctor, you give advice, we figure out policy. He didn't do that. But that aside, and look, we talked about the shutdowns and how devastating that was, although a lot of that devastation was also caused by governors as well. But the fact is, if you take every bad thing that Donald Trump did, it still hasn't been as injurious to the country in anywhere near the extent that Joe Biden's bumbling tomfoolery had been. And by the way, you and I both said that Joe Biden has always been a liar, he's always been a dolt, and he's going to be a horrible president. There was never any doubt about that. I can't think of a person who is least suited intellectually or temperamentally to be president of the United States than Joe Biden. And yet, here we are.
And does anybody really believe he's actually in charge? I mean, I don't believe for a second that he's in charge. I think Obama is the
phoning it in,
Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. and one of the things that they say about Donald Trump in terms of this is their big thing. Democracy is on the ballot. Donald Trump will be
what does that even mean? I still don't know what that means.
Well, their explanation is that Donald Trump has already said he'll be a tyrant when he takes over. And I'm afraid, like the ladies on The View, I'm afraid Donald Trump will just have us taken off the air and thrown in jail. I'm afraid Donald Trump will create camps. And I only have one question for those people. And somebody posted a thing, it's like a warning from Germany. When you have a guy who doesn't care about the facts and who doesn't care about democracy and who's only in it for himself, things can go badly. Your friends, the Germans, shut the fuck up. Number two, then why did he leave the first time?
Right. Why did he follow every Supreme Court and district court ruling that went against him?
of which there were
Not
many.
once did he ever uh, uh, challenge it outside of court.
Unlike Joe Biden.
He followed every single one of those rulings.
Not only that,
That's not a dictator.
not only that, but when he was president, there were a couple of times where people wanted him to do something, and he flat out said, "I can't do that. Congress
Right.
has
It's
to
not
do
within
it."
my purview.
That does, I mean, we have a track record of how he actually governed. He deferred to Congress on legislative matters as much as he disagreed and as much as he said vicious and horrible things about some members of Congress who shot down his proposals. He didn't go the Obama, I've got a phone and a pen.
I've got a pen and a phone, right?
Unlike Joe Biden, who, by the way, has just decided, I don't care what the Supreme Court says, I'm going to forgive student
Yeah,
loans.
screw
anyway.
it. I'm just going to forgive it anyway.
By the way.
Oh, and then, by the way, our debt just went up $400 million.
By the way, from chat, somebody had mentioned something about it, and oh, that's funny. That should turn out well. Europeans never overreact. But it was on student loans particularly. Thanks for paying off my student loans, narrator. Yeah, your kids are on the hook for that. Which is absolutely true. But all this stuff about Trump, getting back to where we were, all the stuff about Trump is going to be a dictator and he hates democracy and all that. Then why didn't he just take over when he had the chance? He was president.
Right. He didn't have to leave. He could have pulled a coup then.
Sure. Why didn't
And according to the Democrats, that's exactly what he tried to do on January 6th.
Yeah. Do they have the transcript of the phone call where he called the chief of staff of the army and ordered the
National Guard? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, again, we get gaslighted day after day after day. And it's,
yeah, and the only question,
this narrative that has been created to protect democratic sensibilities it's all bullshit. Yeah, every single piece of it is bullshit.
The only question you have to ask to those stupid arguments are, why is Joe Biden president now?
Right.
Because why didn't he form so? But now that he's lost, he'll come back and he'll do something super special to be president for life, which
in a lame duck term. Think about it. No matter what,
yeah, it's a lame duck term.
Biden's or Trump, if he wins, will be in a lame duck term. How much could he really accomplish as an authoritarian?
And by the way, let's be honest. The man is active yet fairly overweight, fairly aged. Even if he declared himself president for life, it would not be a burden.
It might last 3 more years.
It would not be a burden we'd have to shoulder for excessively long. Now, Don Jr., on the other hand, or Prince Don, as we'll be required to call him by 2027. Yeah, look, it's just dumb and it's gaslighting. I think the thing that surprises me so much about it is how well it works and how well people parrot those talking points. And the other thing that
but you know this from psychology, right?
But the other thing that shocks me is how quickly those talking points automatically get parroted in the national press.
Oh, well, I mean, that's a Democratic mouthpiece.
Democratic operatives with bylines.
Right. Says. I mean, it's people tend, and especially women, tend to operate based on fear of bad consequences. And most people are this way. They're very risk averse. So you have a constant stream of negative reports and language and predictions. It's going to affect an outcome until you're not believed anymore. And I'm thinking that we might have gotten to the point where, yeah, I'm not buying that anymore. It's a more common refrain than the Democratic buzzword uh, way of campaigning, they don't have the same effect as they used to, because they've been proven so wrong so quickly for so long,
Well,
and people see it.
here's one of the things I thought was interesting last week. There were a couple of videos that came out that showed Joe Biden having a senior moment in a couple of
Right,
different
the cheap
contexts.
fakes, right?
Yeah, and so Catherine Jean-Pierre comes out and says, well, these are all cheap fakes. 12 hours later, CBS News headline, cheap fakes are, causing people to question Biden's competence.
They got their marching orders.
They're pushing disinformation, blah, 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 blah. And they posted that on Twitter, and below that is just reply after reply of, we saw the videos. They're neither cheap nor fakes. I mean,
yeah, and they're not edited. They're just straight up full video.
Yeah, again, when your strategy is who are you going to believe, me or your own lion eyes?
Right.
Well, people are going to believe their own lion eyes ultimately,
and think about it. They're doing this with the economy. They're doing this with Joe Biden's mental acuity. They're doing it with what was it? The Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation
or reduction,
did not reduce a goddamn thing. It was the Green New Deal.
It produced
that's all
spending,
it was,
and that was what it was designed to do. And then you have these look, we have spent like $27 billion on high-speed internet, and we haven't built a single high-speed internet thing.
Haven't connected a single person.
We spent like $30 billion on electrical vehicle recharging, and we've built 7. So
seven. Even the SNBC, who was it? I can't remember who it was. Katie Tur, maybe. Was like, seriously, Pete?
That's
Mayor Pete, come on.
That's $4 billion per charger.
Well, you see, there's a lot of stuff involved in getting it through. It's like, it's been 3 fucking years.
By the way, what the
fuck is wrong with you?
By the way, which is not surprising coming from someone like me who has drunk coffee from a $600 coffee pot in a C5 transporter. That little stainless steel coffee pot that goes in the Bunn coffee maker cost $675 in 1986. God knows what that coffee pot costs now. So that's just how business works.
It was like the $8,000 hammer, the $3,500 toilet seat.
The Pentagon last week it was talking about Ukraine and saying words to the effect of, look, our accounting system doesn't really let us know how much we've actually sent over there. Because, I mean, it's an accounting system. How can you expect it to maintain inventory and inventory costs? That's not what accounting systems do. Well, it may not be what the military accounting system does. And by the way, everybody just shrugs us off. Yeah, that's the way the military works.
Yeah, it's just how it works.
Sure. Was it the week before 9/11? Not Casper Weinberger, Donald Rumsfeld, basically got a report from the Pentagon saying, yeah, we looked over the last decade or so, and there's about $1.7 trillion that we can't account for. Okay.
Well, one under the bridge.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's just government money, which, by the way, is over $35 trillion in debt.
Yep. And again, that's the Milton Friedman, Hayek. This was at the forefront of all their ideologies, and their talking points was that you're spending somebody else's money. You're not going to have the same restraints as you would if it was your actually own money. And it's been proven over and over and over again.
There's only 4 ways to spend money. Spend your money on yourself. Spend your money on someone else. Spend other people's money on yourself or spend other people's money on other people.
Yeah, and guess which one gets the most
Yeah, exactly.
Esprito.
Uh, all right. So, anyway, well, the election will continue, will follow. We'll see if Trump comes back and becomes the horrific dictator that everybody says he'll be, or whether he'll just write a couple of mean
How
tweets for
forward are you
4
looking
years.
to the debate next week? Is it next week?
Yeah, yeah. They'll the
I
joke
think Biden's going to pull out. I still think he's going to pull out.
the joke, of course, is that they're going to load Biden up with so much Adderall that he'll come into that thing like Rosie Greer.
Oh, they're going to have to put him on meth to like get him to like stay straight for 9 minutes.
But of course, Joe always has an advantage in a debate because if
Because he has such low expectations. Yeah.
yeah, because and if you say something that he doesn't agree with or doesn't like, he'll just look you right in the eye and just say that's a
And
lie.
lie.
That's
Yeah.
a lie. That never happened. He did that to
Right.
poor Paul Ryan, and I'll just never forget that deer on the
I remember
headlights
that.
look in Paul Ryan's face in that vice
He's
presidential
just
debate
like, what are you talking about? That's a lie.
when Paul Ryan was
I
like,
just gave you the actual
yeah,
stats.
I just gave you what's actually in the congressional record of what happened. Yeah, that never happened. You're just lying again. And that's how Joe just elides past it. Well, you're just lying. And by the way, I can't imagine anyone who is better suited to determining whether something is a lie than Joe Biden, because the man has made a career of lying. His, graduating top in his class at law school, his son being killed in Iraq. Joe Biden is, and always.
I mean,
has
he lied a man
liar.
into the grave about the tragic death of his wife and daughter, and told everybody, because he was a politician, that it was a drunk driver who killed his wife. When it turns out that the accident was actually caused by his wife, the guy was not drunk, but he ended up killing himself because of harassment about 20 years later. The guy's a ghoul. He has no compunction whatsoever for telling the truth. I don't even think he knows what the truth is.
Yeah, the truth is whatever is convenient for Joe Biden to say at the time.
Yeah.
And
My house burned down. My my kid died in Iraq. Jesus Christ.
So don't come at me with who do you want, the kindly old gentleman or the dictator? Well, I'll take the guy you're calling the dictator because I know that he left the office when he was supposed to. I saw what he did
was
for 4
competent.
years. Yes, and he was largely competent.
I mean, he definitely had screw ups. Every president does.
He would have been more successful were it not for the fact that he basically just got sabotaged by the Uniparty.
That's absolutely true.
He couldn't.
Yeah, well, what the old saw is personnel is policy, and that he could never get that right. He just never was able to get that right.
The trouble is and this does worry me about a possible Trump second term, is that the universe of people for whom a Republican president would usually go to for staffing are not on his side and don't believe in his policies and will attempt to sabotage him. Look,
it's the same deep state problem he had during his presidency. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know how he fixes that problem absent some help from Congress, which doesn't appear
maybe his vice president pick will be able to bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah, well,
I don't know who he could pick who could do that. I mean,
well,
Ron DeSantis, I think, would be a great pick, but Trump's going to have to move. I think JD Vance is a fine pick, but I think he's too green. I love Byron Donaldson, but again, you'd have to move. I don't know who's a good pick for him, but somebody that would understand the ins and outs of congressional debate and log rolling would be somebody he would need, I would think.
Okay, we didn't get to talk about this because we took last week off, but week before last, Governor Nome came out again and said basically, you know who Donald Trump needs as a vice president? He needs to pick a woman. She didn't mention anyone in particular,
Hmm.
but but she appears to think he needs a woman who can make the tough decisions. So we'll just leave that there.
Which
And
she has never done.
yeah, that's
She's
true.
always, I mean, look, she's super hot. I think she is absolutely fine, but she's kind of milk toast. She, I mean, it's North Dakota. Like,
South
you
Dakota.
don't have many or South Dakota. You don't have many hard decisions to make there. She is not a vice presidential candidate and would bring nothing to the table
That's true.
other than being hot.
But she sees a vice president in the mirror every morning when she puts on her
Right, right,
makeup.
right. Happy birthday, future vice president.
Yeah, happy birthday to this future vice president. That referencing the Hillary Clinton, the famous Hillary Clinton tweet. Uh, turns out that was a bad tweet for the 2016 election. Nah. So, Michael, here is your time to shine. The Supreme Court has a couple of things left on the docket, two of which I think we're interested in. Number one, presidential immunity, and number two, homelessness, abortion, social media. Social media is also another interesting, but Chevron.
I think Chevron is the bigger deal. So on, so there's been some really interesting decisions that have come out recently, and I think it really shows the diversity of thinking in the court. They're trying to protect the institutions, but at the same time, they're trying to balance that against actual civil rights. Um, I don't want to get into the Rumisi case about the guy who was stripped of his Second Amendment rights while he had a protective order on him. But I do think that in the Chevron case, that's going to be a game changer because what it could end up doing, depending on how the ruling goes, is that it could seriously carve back power that the administrative state has arrogated to itself and start making them be more responsive to the actual statute as opposed to their own opinions. And this has been something that's been going on.
By the way, which is what they did in the bump stock case last week.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when they just, and people totally misunderstood that. All they said was, you just don't have this power. Congress has this power, and Congress could tell you that you have this power. But Congress hasn't said that yet. Until they do, you do not have this power. And that's exactly right. What I like about the way this court is going is that they're being strict on what powers agencies actually have. What is your statutory mandate? Are you following that? Have you extended it too far? And that's been a theme now for about 3 or 4 years. And I like that because it's the bureaucratic state that oppresses us more than anything because they're unelected. They don't have any checks and balances from the people, yet they basically make laws like Congress. That's just wrong. And I like that the Supreme Court is starting to scale that back. I do think that the Chevron case is going to, I don't know if it'll put an end to the Chevron rule, but I think it's going to scale it back quite a bit. Gorsuch has been a big proponent of how wrong.
He doesn't like Chevron.
No, And he's absolutely right. He's very, very clear, very straightforward that this is not a power you have, period. And he's right, absolutely right, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, speaking of powers that the government doesn't have, the other thing that's coming up uh, that's got to be released this week is that social media censorship case. How far can the
Yeah, that's a
government?
tough one. That's a really tough one. I understand the impetus behind it, but you're dealing, that's a direct First Amendment issue. And I'm not sure that Congress has the power outside of an amendment to actually do anything about that. I certainly don't think states do. I think it's a really tough case. I do understand the national security aspects of it, and I think those need to be respected and I mean deferred to in a certain extent. But we're talking about First Amendment activity, and I just I have a real problem with the federal government stepping in and saying, uh, "You can't see this, you can't watch that, you can't hear this." That's a real problem. I find a lot of problems with that.
On the other hand, the argument is going to be made that both the Texas and Florida law go too far in the other way because TikTok, Facebook X, whoever, they also have a right to determine what they want on their platform.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the states can't override the First Amendment. States have police power, natural police power, but they don't have the power to overcome any of the Bill of Rights. That's a individual protection, and they don't have that right. So it is I respect and understand the reasonings behind what they're trying to do. I am very wary of the means in the way that they're trying to do it, and I disagree with them wholeheartedly. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I think people should be able to say whatever the fuck they want to say.
That
I
brings
do
us.
understand the protections they're trying to put in place, but I just think this is wrongheaded. I think it's going to go down. Um, I think the SCOTUS is going to rule against the states that they've overreached.
Well, that brings us to the last one, which is the Trump immunity case, and which, as the Daily Beast tells us, the Supreme Court is sending out an ominous sign because this should have been a slam dunk. Um, Donald Trump, his bid to be granted king like immunity. Um, this is such an easy case. The Supreme Court should have ruled on this long ago. The delay, here we go. The delay suggests there's something rotten within the court, according to Justice Anthony Kennedy, the former dictator of the United States, uh, writing in the New York Times. And Lord, if it's in the New York Times,
It's got to be true,
it's true.
just like Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and by the way, that's too low for our people watching to read it. So there you go. Something rotten within the court. They are just upset that Donald Trump has put in this thing and that the Supreme Court has not ruled on it yet. But that is still coming up. Donald Trump arguing former presidents are immune from prosecution for official acts they took in office, and that the indictment he faces on charges of election interference must be dismissed.
I got to be honest, it's not an easy question. How do you separate out um, campaign activities from presidential duties?
Well, see, that's the thing. I think that if there is an infirmity in Trump's argument, that's the central infirmity, that we
Yeah,
have to be able to delineate between official acts.
Yes.
And acts that they were taking as a candidate.
Right.
I certainly,
That's a fine line. That's a
yeah,
really fine line.
I certainly understand how that could be hard to.
And think about the repercussions when a president flies to California on official business, but then does campaigning while there. I mean, then which is it? Was it an official act or was it campaigning? It it opens up a Pandora's box, and I think the Supreme Court understands that.
Which hat
That
was he wearing when he picked up the
right,
pen?
exactly. And it's like I expect that the ruling's going to be super narrow, uh, however it comes out. I expect it's going to be super narrow. I really don't expect Trump to win. I'm pretty sure he's going to end up losing because, at least to my naked eyes, these were campaign things he was doing. It had nothing to do with running the country or anything else. It had to do with his election or non-election. Um, I have a hard time seeing that as executive action, and it only benefited him. I don't see. I don't see it. I think that he's going to end up losing. Although I do predict that the decision would be very, very narrow and try to leave as little possibility for precedent as
Well,
possible.
here's the thing, though. The Supreme Court's already said that presidents really aren't subject to civil liability.
Right.
Um, does that extend to criminal liability? And if so, how far does it extend? If he calls up the CIA and says, "Hey, I want you to send somebody down to Dallas and kill Jack Kennedy for me," and they do it, I mean, that's clearly a violation of the law. Is he immune
Right.
from prosecution? I think you might make the argument he's immune while he's president, but we can impeach him and then prosecute him. Um, I This is one of those issues. And we talked about this before. I really think that everybody would be better served if we didn't have to make a decision on this.
You're not wrong.
The ambiguity is, this is one of those areas where the ambiguity is really useful to hang over someone's head. Once
Right.
you start trying to write bright lines, then everyone is
You
going,
can't do it in this case.
Yeah.
That's just, yeah, absolutely right.
and everyone is
That
going to try to
trying to
step
do a
right
bright
up to
line
that
rule
bright
is just
line.
not going to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, this is a toughie on that, and I don't know. And by the way, isn't the counter argument? Isn't everything a president does designed to get him reelected?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the Pandora's box. Like, once you start going down that road, well, then we're just back to Champerty, where you sue presidents in order to gain control over their agenda. I think it's a very dangerous road to go down. And look, I do disagree with the prosecution. I think it's absolutely feckless and unsubstantiated. But on this question, I'm kind of in agreement with you, Dale. I would rather they almost didn't rule, but they're going to have to. And I'm hoping it's as narrow as possible. Very limited to this particular case, because I think it's a really dangerous precedent to have.
Right. By the way, I do want to address something in chat off topic. Sorry, I'm running my face. Been following these guys forever. This is the first time I've jumped in. Don't worry about running your face. You're perfectly happy in chat there, Sean. So don't worry about it. But yes.
Sean who?
Sean Moeller.
Oh, okay. That's not my friend, Sean.
That's the name that he's using. If that is indeed your real name, sir. But yeah, it's a tough ruling. I want them to be very narrow about it, because it's always this is the old argument Richard Nixon used to make. It's not me I'm worried about. It's future former presidents. You know, it has that kind of Nixonian vibe to it, although I don't think that is certainly applicable in this case because Richard Nixon did, in fact, try to conspire to cover up a felony. Nevertheless, once you start trying to set these rules down, everybody's going to step right up to whatever they think the line is. And
then extend it by penumbras
and now we have a new area of law where every president is going to investigate the penumbras and emanations from that ruling, and every Congress or prosecutor or whatever is going to say that's outside those rulings. And also, when it comes to, well, there's so many issues with a president of the United States. Now, whether a sitting president, I think impeachment is our only option. What happens after they're impeached is a separate subject. But while they're president, I think impeachment is our only option. I'm not sure it's a great option. Doesn't seem to be one that's very effective, but I think that's our only option.
That's true. Yeah.
But when it comes to former presidents, the thing that really scares me now is getting into this situation where, it's the end of the Roman Republic.
I was gonna bring that up. That's exactly.
You
that's
serve
why,
as consul for a year, and then the second
Caesar crossed the Rubicon because he knew that if he gave up power over his army, that he was going to get prosecuted by treason. The Senate.
Yes. And every consul, the second that there was another consular election and they elected the two new consuls for the next year, you knew your next stop was right down in the forum because you were going to have to answer for charges of treason for what you did while you were consul. We really, really don't want to get down that road.
But isn't that the path that we're going?
But yeah, that is the path. Once you've decided to criminalize politics, look, this stupid case in New York where Trump lost for being convicted of business fraud while trying to conspire to commit another crime, which was to illegally influence the election.
Well, we don't know what it was.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. We don't know what it was. If you think he's a bad man, you can convict him. That was the jury. Do you not like this guy? You know what? Fucking convict him. Those are your instructions. Yeah, you don't have to agree on a crime or agree. By the way, precedent is really clear on this. Yeah, you do all have to agree on the same crime. I think this conviction gets overturned. But look, it was only bought.
He hasn't been sentenced yet, though.
No.
He's not getting sentenced until July 11th, which is like 2 days before the Republican primary.
Yes, completely. Completely coincidentally. The thing is, it's going to be overturned way after the election. They got what they wanted. They got their conviction. And now they're full court pressing. Are you going to vote for a convicted felon? 34 counts. He was convicted. 34 felonies. Okay, it's going to get overturned, but we can ignore that. We know it was a bullshit prosecution. But if we are going to get into a situation now where, and I'm sure it won't be for every president because the system doesn't want to go after every former president, just those former presidents that might still be a threat to the system.
Right.
Do we really want to get into, look at the number of prosecutions Trump is facing now. And there's no way that you can convince me that those are all great prosecution based on a fair and unbiased reading of the law.
If you brought up the end of the Roman Empire,
Republic, actually.
Republic, yes. It was. I mean, we're in the exact same scenario. We are now going to have a patrician class and political class that protects its own, screws the people, does nothing for the people, does everything for itself. And they're all fighting for the spoils of being the supreme leader.
By the way, chat, I don't care if he's in Sing Sing. I'm still voting for him.
Well, I agree with you.
Sing Sing is
It's in California, isn't it?
no, Sing Sing is a New York State penitentiary.
It is New York.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, no, it's what's.
Well, I don't think it exists anymore. I don't think Sing Sing exists anymore.
Oh, it's not there anymore.
No. It was a pretty old prison. I think they got shut down in the 50s or 60s. But in any event, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of people out there who say, you throw Trump in jail. And by the way, not surprise me if Marchand just says, yeah, you're going to jail. I
expect it. I absolutely expect it.
I can toss you in jail for a year and nobody can say boo to me.
Mm-hmm.
So deliver yourself to the Department of Corrections on or about the second Monday in November.
Right.
Coincidentally.
I'm not going to be even slightly shocked when that happens.
No, neither will I. Because now they'll say, oh, he's headed to jail. How are we going to have a president from prison? I don't.
Well, we could make it work.
Yeah, and look, I don't think that the case in Georgia has any other merit with Fannie Willis. Why she's still even on that case?
Why she's not in jail is beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, the classified documents case, the FBI stage managed that entire raid on Mar-a-Lago to include showing us classified cover sheets that they bought with them.
Well, there's also that question. Who was it that brought that up? Is it Julie Kelly, who's been the big one on that? About how there was like 15 boxes that the Trump organization, after he was out of office, was ordered to come take hold of. And they didn't know it was all in there. And there's a real question about how many of these supposedly top secret documents were sprinkled in to those 15 boxes.
And if any,
because they weren't ones that Trump took, they were ones that they were ordered to take by the National Archives.
Yeah,
I mean, the whole thing is so smelly. It's so fucking underhanded.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you've got Joe Biden, who, according to her, he absolutely violated the rules, and he was never president before he took these documents. He was a senator.
Yeah, documents from when he was a senator that he should have had no access to outside of a SCIF. And we're just going to let him go because he's too old and senile to be prosecuted. Andrew McCabe, who ran the FBI, lied to the IG inspectors under penalty of perjury. He got shoved out the door 2 weeks early. Then he sued them, got his pension back.
And got his payback. Yep.
A day in jail? No. You or I lie to the FBI, which, by the way, just so that you know, if the FBI comes up and says we have a couple of questions, the proper answer is, I don't answer questions.
Right.
I want a lawyer.
Not without my attorney present.
I demand counsel from an attorney immediately. I will not answer questions. I will make no statement, oral or written. I will answer no questions and then shut your mouth and say nothing.
Absolutely.
They can't. I mean, look, they did a whole investigation of Martha Stewart on insider trading. Could not find enough evidence to convict her on insider trading. Did they walk away? Nah. They just said, well, how about this? You lied to us. You said you didn't remember. Clearly you did. So here's 6 months in federal prison.
Hey, but now she's Snoop Dogg's best friend.
Funny, Andrew McCabe didn't get that treatment.
Yeah. Or that guy Christensen.
Peter Strzok or Lisa whatever.
Strzok or Lisa, yeah, right.
Or whoever it was.
James Clapper?
Whoever it was under James Comey's watch that just lied on a FISA warrant and committed perjury. They in jail.
That was the Christiansburg guy or something.
Yeah,
like that.
It's funny what gets people sent to jail and what doesn't. And in Donald Trump's case, they are...
Scooter Libby. Scooter Libby got sent to fucking jail.
That's true. Yep.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I know.
It's just,
And you don't think we have a two-tiered justice system, and you don't think the government will come after you for thinking the wrong thing or supporting the wrong person? I got bad news for you. The country that we thought we were living in is not the country we actually live in. The country I was born in is gone. God, I wish I could get a passport back to that place. And every institution is corrupt.
I would put it a different way. The country that we grew up in still exists. It's not governed by people who have any contact or affiliation with that country. Americans are still Americans. We look out for each other, we care for each other. We work hard, we play hard, and we do a lot of great stuff. It's the people in the political class who have left us, and they have nothing to do with us whatsoever. They're only out for themselves.
And with that, I give you the last word, Michael. Always a pleasure, and I will look forward to speaking with you again next time.
All right, buddy.
For the rest of you, you've been watching the Observations Podcast for Sunday, 23rd June, 2024. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. I'll look forward to seeing you next time, too. Until then, have a great week. So long.